Today's lecture is an overview of the structure of the universe. I'm going to start with the Milky Way, the galaxies, and then we'll go to the structure of the universe as a whole, with the emphasis again on how do we know that. In understanding the shape of our own galaxy or of nearby galaxies, it's most important to understand globular clusters. Whereas the galaxy itself has around 100 billion stars, a galactic globular cluster has only 1 million. Okay, so one over 100,000 of a whole galaxy. Therefore, although the number sounds unbelievably large, those million stars are relatively small in comparison to a galaxy. They have one more important thing, and that is they have an HR diagram that's very different than regular HR diagrams. It kind of turns around quite early. There are no blue stars whatsoever, and that's because these clusters are very old. That means all blue stars have died by now, have exploded by now. Remember, fatties die young, and in that example most of the fatties have died already. Once we understood their HR diagram, we knew the distance to those globular clusters from their HR diagram. But even beforehand, Shapley used RR Lyrae variable stars, which you can see in this slide, in order to find the distance to those globular clusters and figure out that they do not surround us, but rather somewhere around the Sagittarius constellation was the center of our galaxy, around which those hovered. What we will see later on is that other variable stars are super important in our understanding of distances in the universe as a whole. Yep, I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking about a Milky Way bar, Milky Bar. But that's not what the galaxy is. In the next part on this slide, you see what the night sky looks like if you look in a very dark place, and that strip strewn across the heavens is the Milky Way in which we are located. Focusing on a region in that strip that kind of widens up, you'll find that that is right next to Sagittarius. And look at Sagittarius. It does look like a teapot with a spout on the right and a handle on the left, plus a little extra triangle above the handle. This is also called the Archer. A little bit tougher to see. But in any case, from the spout pours the Milky Way, so it seems. So we know the distance to the center of the Milky Way by using globular clusters and our Lyra in those globular clusters. Then when we aim our infrared telescopes at the night sky, what we see is the following picture with the clump, this big globe in the middle. That is the center of the galaxy near Sagittarius, near the teapot. We can use the overall emission of infrared as well in order to figure out how much dust we have in the Milky Way, and that supports our measurements of distances. Here is again in an infrared picture of the night sky with all the constellations on them, and you can see how lovely, how very precise that infrared shows the Milky Way to be. Using the highest energy photons, those in the gamma rays, remember there's Roy G. Biv, then ultraviolet and X-rays, and then gamma rays. Gamma rays also highlight the Milky Way, but they also highlight some clumps above and below which are active galaxies outside of our own. The way we know about the arms, as you can see in the following picture, it shows our Sun, and then the Orion arm, Sagittarius arm, Perseus arm, etc. And the way we know about the arms is that we are at the location of the Sun, looking for example towards the Sagittarius arm, in the radio part of the spectrum. From that we can see the speeds of various parts of the arms, and since the whole galaxy is spinning, we can figure out from the speeds the distances and the speeds. Now if you assume that most of the mass is near the center, this kind of works with those spiral arm picture. I'm asking a few questions as usual, so go ahead and read. I'll give you a few seconds, and then you can pass to the next slide and see the answer. It's about 15 seconds. So as expected, the main way by which we found the center of the Milky Way galaxy is to look at globular clusters that hover above and below the bulge at the center of our galaxy, not around us. I'll give you a few more seconds here. Whereas the surface of the Sun emits mostly in the visible part of the spectrum, hence we evolved to see the visible part of the spectrum. The surface of the Sun is at temperatures that are around 6,000 degrees Celsius, whereas infrared is at a much lower temperature than that. Looking at a nearby galaxy like the Milky Way, we can see those spiral arms, and we can see a few small galaxies like the one on the bottom right and the one on the top left. There are mini galaxies that are called elliptical galaxies. Of course, the rest of the stars we're seeing are actually in our own galaxy in the foreground, kind of like dust flakes on the window as we look outside. This is that small galaxy on the bottom right in the previous slide, only this time around looking in the UV part, the near UV part. Therefore we're only looking at the bluest, largest, most luminous stars in that small galaxy, so we're only seeing the very fat, the very few of the very fat that still remain in that elliptical galaxy. That's why we see individual stars in a faraway galaxy, whereas mostly galaxies that we look at not in a UV would be a fuzz, would be a continuum, would be basically a continuum of pixels. Here that's not true because we see individual stars only because it's the very brightest of them. This nifty picture that's fairly recent, in a combination of visible plus infrared, shows the infrared sources of the galaxy in dust plus the visible part of the galaxy, and we're looking at our neighbor, the Andromeda galaxy again. The reason I chose this specific galaxy, M100 near the Big Dipper, is because in the next picture we will see a variable star in that galaxy which will tell us how far it is. Surrounded with a yellow circle is a variable star, and we're looking at it at intervals of weeks. You can see that that star changes in brightness over that period. That brightness would tell us how far it is. Same picture without the circles. Look at the three insets and see how the star at the very middle changes in brightness. That specific star that changes in brightness on a matter of weeks, see, between 10 days and 50 days, that is a Cepheid type 1. As you can see, the period tells us almost exactly what the absolute magnitude is. Absolute magnitude actually corresponds to brightness, to how bright it is, which is between 1,000 and 10,000 times the luminosity, the power of our sun. Now if you know the power, you can tell the distance. Same as if you had a 60-watt light bulb right next to your eye, it would basically blind you. But if it is a mile away, it will be just a speck of light. Now here we're looking at those Cepheids through a telescope, therefore it's even dimmer than that, and we can tell the exact distance to that galaxy using Cepheids. With that in mind, let's try and see what we know about those galaxies. How do we know how far away they are? Notice one of the possible answers was only implied, only hinted at. The globular cluster answer, of course, was only hinted at, whereas the stars in them are fainter is true both for the UV stars we've seen in the picture of M32 right next to M31, and also in the Cepheid variables. Okay, try this one. Okay, the answer is the simplest one. We've been speaking about Cepheid variables, therefore that's the answer. This whitish pinkish continuation, not the stars in the foreground but the actual fuzz, is an elliptical galaxy. This is called a giant elliptical galaxy. It's made of actually hundreds of billions of stars. It's even bigger than the Andromeda galaxy near us. This particular picture is interesting because of a couple of things. First of all, if you've ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart from 1946 or 47 that used to be shown every Christmas on TV, I think they still show it on NBC. Every time they show God speaking with the angels, they show a picture of something called the Stephan's Quintet, which is a group of galaxies. Of course, their picture was taken in the 1940s. This one was taken with the Hubble Space Telescope. What I like about this picture is the galaxy on the bottom that's devouring the galaxy right next to it on the right. And you will find out that galaxies do that. Galaxies, unlike stars, are relatively close to one another in many areas, whereas in other areas they're very far from each other. Even the closest of the closest stars, relative to their own size, are incredibly far away from each other. From the fact that the elliptical galaxy is more pinkish, you may find out something about it. Think HR diagram. Why is it that those elliptical galaxies are kind of orangish? Indeed, elliptical galaxies have fewer younger stars, therefore fewer blue stars. Therefore, on the average, they look a little bit more reddish towards the lower right corner of the HR diagram, where you find more red-colored stars. The next few pictures show splashes of galaxies that interact with each other. In the first one, it's kind of a combined splash. In the second one, it's a bullseye, a galaxy that hit another in the middle. And the third one is basically looking like two sperms stuck together, but it's a combination of two galaxies that actually slammed into one another. We now believe that in the center of every galaxy almost there is a black hole. But the sizes of the black holes depend on previous interactions, previous collisions between galaxies. If the galaxy collision was an effective one, there would be more material transferred into the black hole, and therefore the black hole would have grown to billions times the mass of the Sun, whereas those that did not have as many interactions only have millions or tens of millions sized black holes in their center. This is still ongoing research. After we will cover some more the active parts of the galaxy, we will also cover the structure, the largest scale structure of the universe made of those galaxies. This picture is made of billions of galaxies. This is actually a combination of observed and simulated picture, and the Sloan Great Wall, Shapley, etc. are examples of superclusters of galaxies, and in between them we have something called supervoids. In this picture we see a combination actually in this picture we see a simulation of these bubbles and voids, where the voids, the black areas, are regions which are incredibly empty of galaxies, and the bright areas have lots of galaxies. The whole picture here has a few million galaxies in a region that's 100 million light years across.